AfriKili family and Global PAC Nation, welcome to another edition of the Global PAC Show. This is Tony Fumu Simba. Donald Trump wanted to take over Greenland. Remember that? And if you remember, the reason that he gave us was that it was all for world peace. Because, well, the Chinese and the Russians were increasing their influence in that region. And so, just for the sake of world peace, because Donald Trump is so adamant on having a world and a peaceful world, he wanted to take over Greenland. Well, lo and behold, it is not just about Greenland. It seems like Donald Trump is actually hell-bent on creating unrest and going on the verge of him himself now causing a world war. I'm talking about the global trade war that were caused by Donald Trump, who enacted sweeping tariffs against countries across the world, and just sending shockwaves across the world and conflicts looming. Well, in light of this looming disastrous economic consequences that are showing up on the horizon, how should the Global PAC respond? But even more importantly, is the Global PAC and Black people ready to compete in light of this global trade war that is facing the world? Well, we'll discuss that and many other topics on today's show. So there you have it. Fasten your seatbelt. Let's dive in and let's get to work. Hello once again, AfriKili family and Global PAC Nation. Such a pleasure for me to be here once again in front of you today on this Tuesday, April 8th, 2025, on this wonderful, wonderful day. And so before getting started, let me start by thanking every single one of you, as usual, who support this platform, who support the Global PAC Show, our live concept, who tune in, who comment, who send me messages. Much appreciated. And for those of you who have not done so, let me just take the time and ask you to just take a second. If you would, please just click on the subscribe button, which would be somewhere around your screen. Only takes a second. But guess what? When you do that, you help me, you help this platform grow so that we can reach the objective we've set for ourselves for 2025. But not only that, it allows you to be part of our growing community. This is a growing community. All right, so you become part of the dialogue and you help us grow it, but we grow together. But here's the deal. Without you, we cannot do it. So once again, please just take the time to click on the subscribe button, and also remember to share this show, like, comment, send messages, much appreciated. And for those of you who like it, also remember there's a website. Those of you who like reading, www.afrikili.com. You'll find past issues of our blog, written blog, so it can allow you to read some of the past blogs, but also give you a good sense on the philosophy, the ideas behind this whole AfriKili and Global PAC concept. So yeah, so please tune in and you can definitely find some articles there. All right, so there you have it. So let's go straight into our topic today: global trade wars. I mean, unless you've been hiding under a rock, you know that the world is in a big tumult. Ever since the one and only Donald J. Trump once again sent shockwaves through the world by issuing sweeping tariffs across the world. So it is interesting to me to see how the world has been reacting. So today I'll spend a big chunk of the show talking about how the world has reacted, and focusing really on the Global PAC, right? The global Pan-African community. So that would be Africa and the Caribbean, so communities of Black people around the world. So we'll spend a bit of time on that, and also beyond the reaction, maybe seeing or discussing how we think the Global PAC should be responding to make sure that nobody is left behind and that the Global PAC continues thriving in light of the very challenging geopolitical global economics condition that are being fueled by Donald Trump's action. Now, that being said, I want to just take one quick second. This was interesting, and it might be of interest to some of you. Forbes, the Forbes magazine that releases an annual list of the richest people in the world and so on. So it was interesting to me that there is among the list. So Forbes also decided to classify the world's black billionaires. So this is just, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it's still good for me to mention this. Some people out there might think that, yeah, black people complain a lot, black people don't achieve. No, there's high achievers in the black community. And so from time to time, it's interesting to me to bring, to shed a light on that. And here I'm talking about business acumen, right? So obviously, black people, just like any other humans, right? Because obviously black people are not inherently deficient when it comes to human abilities compared to other racial groups, other ethnicities. Nevertheless, again, it is important to shed the light on this because there might be a lot of misconception out there. So when it comes to business, so this Forbes list really is just about talking about some of the wealthiest people in the world. So once again, a few days ago, I did a show on Aliko Dangote. Right, actually, last week I did a show on Aliko Dangote, the Nigerian billionaire who built one of the biggest refineries, right, in Nigeria, in the world, but his refineries in Nigeria. Well, based on this Forbes list of billionaires, Aliko Dangote is ranked number one on this 2025 list with a net worth estimated at $23 billion, actually $23.9 billion, so it's almost $24 billion. So Aliko Dangote from Nigeria. So he is not only the richest African, but he's the richest black person in the entire world. And then at number two, you have David Stewart with a net worth of about $11 billion. I'm just going to quickly go through this ranking and just talk about the top 10. I'm not going to go through the entire list, which is it's very long. Just like the top 10 here. And so, yeah, David Stewart, whose wealth was in the IT field. And then you have Robert F. Smith with a net worth of about $10.8 billion, who created his wealth in private equity. If you've been following this platform for a while, AfriKili and Global PAC, I did a show almost maybe a couple of years ago, or maybe a little less than that, on Robert Smith, because back then he had really sent shockwaves, I think, across the world. There's a lot of news when he decided to forgive the debt, or actually donate money so that the graduating class at Morehouse College that year, when he gave the commencement speech, he essentially paid for the student loan debt for that entire graduating class, which was just such a massive thing that he did. But anyway, Robert Smith, so he comes in at number three with $10.8 billion. Then number four, you have Alexander Karp, $8.4 billion. He's also a software giant. And number five, you have Mike Adenuga with a net worth of $6.8 billion. Created his wealth in telecom and oil. He's from Nigeria. And then at number six, you have Abdul Samad Rabiu, also from Nigeria, with a net worth of $5.1 billion. Created his wealth in sugar and cement. At number seven, you have Michael Jeffrey Jordan. The famous basketball player, obviously, with a net worth of $3.5 billion. American. And number eight and number nine are tied with the same estimated net worth of $3 billion. So here we're talking about Patrice Motsepe from South Africa, who created his wealth in mining. So he's tied with Oprah Winfrey, who also has a net worth of $3 billion. Obviously, Oprah Winfrey is the TV show host from the United States of America. She's a U.S. citizen. Somebody that I really like a lot. And then at number 10, you have Jay-Z with a net worth estimated at $2.5 billion. Obviously, Jay-Z, who's a music giant, rapper, hip hop, and so on. So this is the top 10. I mean, if you want to you want to read the entire list, I mean, you can go on online and look at Forbes. So Forbes ranks the 23 black billionaires who were featured on the list of the richest people in the world for 2025. Just an interesting note: the 23 billionaires that Forbes ranked have a combined net worth estimated at $96 billion. That's a lot of money, a lot of wealth. Now, granted, if you look at the richest people in the world, like the Jeff Bezos, the Bernard Arnault, the Elon Musk, obviously their individual net worth is more than the 23 combined black billionaires here, but nevertheless, it's still very inspiring, I think, for some people who aspire to this sort of stratospheric wealth, seeing that we have a lot of black people that are doing very well in business. So that's important to mention. All right. We have a lot of good, successful black billionaires. So that's fantastic. All right. So as I said, I would not spend a lot of time on this. This was just a quick deviation to kind of tell you about that. All right. So let's go straight into our topic for today, which is the global trade war. Now, what exactly is going on here? Just a quick rationale. Donald Trump saying that, well, the world has been treating us very badly because some of the world markets, so other countries are closing off their markets to American goods, but then they're sending their goods into America, which is the biggest consumer market in the world. And so Donald Trump is saying that, no, we're being abused. And so therefore, I will impose tariffs so that if you want to bring your goods into America, you will pay the price to distribute your goods in America. So a tariff essentially is a tax, right? Is what you would pay for your goods to come into America. So he imposed significantly high tariffs, not only on some partners, but like across the globe. So the rationale again here about this tariffs, whether you agree with it or not. So as I mentioned, Donald Trump is saying that the U.S. has been treated badly, has been abused. And so because all these other countries are creating the goods in a cheap fashion, and so they're bringing it in the U.S., but because they're producing the goods in their country, that's creating unemployment in the United States, right? So that's some of the rationale about it. So creating unemployment in the United States. And so Donald Trump is saying, no, if I impose tariffs, those goods will be a couple of things he wants to see happen here. One, he wants maybe to force the other countries to readily accept American goods, right? To open their markets to American goods. But he also wants to create a situation where those imported goods are so expensive in the United States to where it incentivizes local production so that manufacturing can grow once again in the United States. Because as you know, one of the biggest support of Donald Trump, the working class, we're talking about like the Midwest belt and so on, which were traditionally manufacturing hubs in the United States, but over the last few decades, as manufacturing capacity has been diminishing in the United States and a lot of that production has been shipped overseas, that created a lot of unemployment. Even though unemployment is very low right now in the United States, it still created a situation where the middle class is not doing as well as it did, because you had jobs like manufacturing jobs that did not necessarily require a college degree that allowed people to get into the middle class. Well, that is no longer the case. So the thinking here is that we will resuscitate manufacturing in the United States, and so the manufacturing economy will become more dynamic. The capacity will increase, will create more jobs, and so the economy will do well. And as Donald Trump say, it will make us very wealthy, and so on. That is, it's an interesting rationale. Even though a lot of economists are disagreeing with the manner in which Donald Trump is going about wanting to enact this change, because there's some truth to the fact that obviously China, for the last few decades, has become the manufacturing hub of the world, right? Just to name China, of course, you have Vietnam, you have many other countries. But the thing is, it's I kind of find it rich when Donald Trump, in a sense, is advancing a victimhood stance, in my opinion, because there are a few things. First, China becoming the manufacturing hub did not force any company to delocate from the United States or Europe or other developed countries and to go produce in China. It's not as if China put the gun on anybody's heads and forced them to go to China. Well, this is this whole capitalistic ideology, right? Because you have all these companies that, based on a capitalism ideology, that want to prioritize, maximize profit, and they see China as a location where they have a lot of cheap labor, there's some infrastructure. So the companies are going there to produce cheaply and then bring the goods back to the US. That's how it started. Because the thing with capitalism, it's obviously a very individualistic ideology, right? It's not really about the group, it's about pursuing your own individual best interest. That's what really capitalism is about, is everybody pursuing their own interest, right? And so maximizing their interest, following financial incentives and so on. So that's what those companies did. So American companies left the US to go find profit overseas, because the thinking is, as they're creating the products cheaply overseas, obviously their production cost diminishes, and so when they sell it at the same price, they make bigger margin. I mean, that was the calculus. So it's not playing the victim here. It's like this whole momentum started with that impetus of making more money for American firms, and then different firms followed suit. Now, obviously, over time, China that had different policies in terms of IPs, intellectual properties, and so on, that essentially just ended up copying a lot of the methods that these companies were employing. I'm talking about this decades ago, but over time, China was able to build off of that, but also not build its own capacity, where it's no longer copying, but innovating and actually creating. But again, that whole impetus that pushed companies to leave the United States to go manufacture in China, it was the doing of American companies, right? So that's how it started. So it's playing the victim here is maybe sometimes forgetting some of those incentives. The other thing is, Donald Trump is blaming globalization, saying that globalization has treated the U.S. unfairly. That also is very, very rich to me, because the U.S., that was actually the leading force behind this globalization movement, has benefited more than any other country when it comes to globalization. I mean, since World War II, there's a financial system that has been put in place where the U.S. has been the biggest beneficiary. If we look at foreign reserves, for example, currency reserves, well, I mean, the U.S. dollar has de facto being the international currency reserves across the world. Financial transactions are denominated in dollars. That has given tremendous power and leverage to the United States, to the point where the U.S. has been free to enact sanctions against anybody around the world based on that. After the Second World War, we talk about the Bretton Woods institutions that were created under the impulse of the United States to ensure that the U.S. dominance was effective across the world, soft power and hard power. So globalization has tremendously benefited the United States. I mean, I remember when I was in business school many years ago, there used to be this, in some of the classes, we talk about the responsibilities of firm. Well, there's this concept of where in capitalism, right? There's this concept whereas firms have a moral obligation to maximize their profits, and that moral obligation is towards their shareholders. So here it was all about the bottom line. It was all about pursuing the dollar. This whole globalization, again, which was an impulse of the United States of America, on the basis of maximizing profit, benefited the United States. When I look at continents like Africa, even some other countries in the global South, the Global PAC, we had things like, say, structural readjustment, right? That's where the World Bank, for example, goes into African countries in the 60s, forces them to restructure their economies so that they would repay the debts that was given to them by the World Bank, IMF, and so on. But the World Bank forcing African countries, for example, to abandon some industries which they deemed not profitable, but which in the long term would have created more jobs and allowed African countries to be stronger economically. But no, we're forced to go away from some of those industries and focus more on things like, raw material, mineral extraction and so on. That would be more profitable, that they can export that. And then, but then as a result, opening up African markets to be flooded by products coming from American farmers and so on. So that actually, what Donald Trump is complaining about, the American market being flooded by foreign cheap goods, is something that has been done to Africa for the longest in some of the Global PAC nations. But anyhow, it's so the U.S. is really in no position to play victim here in a system that it itself created, right? Now, some countries have taken also a lot of benefits, like China has benefited tremendously, obviously, from globalization also. So it's not only the U.S., many countries have benefited. China lifting so many people out of extreme poverty, China becoming a global economic power, developing its country. It's on the basis of obviously creating so much profit from companies coming into that country, creating a lot of jobs. So that helped China tremendously. Nobody disputes that. So that's a fact. But also, so the other rationale also with Donald Trump imposing these tariffs is, as people like to say, Donald Trump is very transactional, right? So he is doing it as a negotiation ploy, because the thinking is that as he's imposing these tariffs, he's going to force people to come to the negotiation table. And in a way, I mean, the Trump administration, as of this morning, for example, they're stating that over 70 countries have reached out to send delegations to the U.S. so they would, try to negotiate bilateral agreements. So he's using the tariff also as a negotiation tactic, so people would come to the table and then negotiate, quote unquote, better tariffs. So is that working? We'll see in the long term. But countries like China, for example, are already saying no. They're refusing to negotiate. I was listening to a report as of this morning, for example, the Chinese government issuing statements saying that they will not cede to blackmail. They are qualifying the U.S. government's action and Donald Trump's action as blackmail, saying that they will not cede to that and they will fight to the end. So it will be interesting to see what's going there. But if you look at what has been happening on the global markets, the markets have been tumbling, right? I mean, the market, Dow Jones, the Nasdaq index, the market has been tumbling ever since the announce of these tariffs. Now there was a bit of a rebound as of today, this morning. So people are anticipating that as maybe the waters calm down a bit, there might be a bit of a rebound, but still, there's still a lot of unrest. So Donald Trump's calculus here, will it work? We'll see in the long term. A lot of economists are saying that this is really the wrong approach. It's a misunderstanding of the global politics. Well, Donald Trump is steady fast in his approach. He is maintaining a stance that he actually has been espousing for decades. Since I think the 80s and 90s, Donald Trump has always been saying, yeah, other countries are taking advantage of us, of our consumer market. We have the biggest consumer market in the world, and we've been treated unfairly. That's his position, and it would appear that he would want to remain steadfast in that position until he reaches what he sees as a beautiful picture down the line. A lot of suffering will be forecasted. It's forecasted, and Donald Trump already said, well, he's asking the American people to be patient. He's saying that it's akin to taking medicine as he's wanting to cure the situation. And so whenever the situation is cured, then it will be better for everybody. But the suffering, will be real. And when Donald Trump talked about he would cure inflation, from day one in office, well, it would appear that those are just, empty campaign promises that will not be the case here. All right. So we've talked a bit about the rationale. So the focus of this show, as I said in the introduction, I want to talk more about the response across the global PAC, right? But also how I think we should respond in a way that would position the global PAC in a better light and allow the global PAC to really emerge from this stronger, economically speaking. So talking about the reaction, we were just going to start a bit by looking at the Caribbean. Okay. So, here I have a picture of Irfan Ali, the president of Guyana, who was welcoming Marco Rubio. But it would appear that Marco Rubio's visit did not bear fruit because obviously Guyana was hit with tariffs. Guyana actually was hit with some of the highest tariffs in the Caribbean at 30-some%. And Guyana, that imports a lot of oil to the United States, oil, rum, gold, timber, shrimp, agricultural products, and so on. So Guyana was hit with 38% tariffs. But let's look at some of the responses, as I said, across the Caribbean, because obviously the Caribbean is a big part of the Global PAC, the Global Pan-African community. Here's obviously when I mentioned Global PAC. If you've been following this platform, you know that it's not only Africa, but it's people of African descent across the world. So the global diaspora. So we're talking about the Caribbean, African Americans, and of course Africa, but also African immigrants. So we're talking about really people of African descent across the world. The global diaspora and the Caribbean is a big part of the global PAC. So in terms of the response in the Caribbean, so what Guyana is saying here, Irfan Ali, his government issued a statement, right, saying here, I'm going to read this from an article from an outlet called Caribbean Life, so caribbeanlife.com. All right, so it says that the government of Guyana has taken note of the reciprocal tariffs that have been announced by the United States and is engaging its relevant partners. Our government is closely engaged with our U.S. partners to better understand the issue and have it addressed as appropriate. So this was an official statement from the government of Guyana in response to the 38% tariffs that were slapped by Donald Trump. So so in this response, there's not a sense of panic, right? It would appear it's more like poise. It's okay. We take note of what has been done. We will discuss, and then we will take appropriate measure. That's really the tone of this response. You don't sense panic here. So if we continue across the Caribbean and seeing what other Caribbean government have been saying, for example, you have Prime Minister Stuart Young, who's the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. So what did Stuart Young say here? So by the way, Trinidad, you might know, exports prior to the U.S. It exports natural gas, ethanol, ammonia, petroleum gas, and rum. So the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago said that Trinidad is prepared to sit across the table and negotiate regardless of who is on the other side. So that was his statement with regard to the tariffs. And then let's continue in the Caribbean. We have Jamaica. So the government of Jamaica also was saying that they're still looking at the details. And so they also issued a statement. So here's what they said. They say that we are obtaining the requisite technical documentation to ensure accuracy of details and appropriate analysis. Please be assured that we appreciate the public's need for further information and clarity and will update the business community and the wider public accordingly. The government of Jamaica has taken note of the new tariff regime announced yesterday by the President of the United States of America. All right, so again, here, same tone I would say as we saw with Guyana. All right, so Jamaica is really issuing a statement that wants to communicate calmness, wants to communicate that they're looking at the situation, studying it, don't want to issue any sense of panic. And we're going to finish with Barbados, which is also in the Caribbean. So what is Barbados saying in response to the tariffs? So here we have the finance minister of Barbados. His name is Ryan Strachan. So here's what he said in a statement. He said, we have put these tariffs in place. No, I'm sorry. He's talking about the tariffs that were enacted by his local government, right? So Barbados, and this was in response to obviously the Trump tariffs. So he's explaining a bit and then responding. So here's what he said: we have put these tariffs in place as a measure to protect domestic and regional businesses as we try to ensure that issue relating to food security as well as jobs. Therefore, to the extent that CARICOM as a body, as a group in relation to these matters, we have a common external tariff in place, of which the U.S. would be one of those countries that apply as one of those countries out of CARICOM. And therefore, I think from a regional perspective, we will have to ensure that we focus on how do we get support for our producers in being able to access the full global supply chain and be able to start to do more trade with each other. So this is interesting, right? Because he really is not only issuing a statement with a tone that's not communicating panic, but he's actually turning it on its face. He's saying, well, we should actually look within CARICOM. CARICOM is the Caribbean community, so that's the body that assembles all the Caribbean nations. He is saying that within CARICOM, they need to adopt more of a regional response that would allow them to increase their trade with each other and strengthen their own producers. So this is interesting to me. This actually goes in line with what I was talking about, I think a couple weeks ago, when I was saying how, Donald Trump's policy of America first and wanting to disengage with many countries around the world, even though this tariff is a bit different here, but that whole mindset is actually creating a gap across the world. And in the Global PAC, it's a massive opportunity for governments to actually come together and fill the gaps in a way that will actually strengthen them and allow them to build and grow from that. Because those markets, those nations in the Global PAC, here we're talking about the Caribbean have massive markets if organized well in unity strategically within the CARICOM. They can strengthen those local economies to the point where tomorrow they can actually negotiate in a bigger position of strength when it comes to competing and negotiating against the United States, against China, against other the European Union, and so on. So a group response is needed, because even if you look at Europe, for example, you're not hearing necessarily countries like saying, okay, so we need to negotiate alone, France needs to negotiate alone. No, you hear Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, saying, no, we need to have a EU response putting in advance our massive market of over 450 million people. So it is important for nations, especially within common blocks, to actually strengthen each other. And the Caribbean being an important part of the global PAC, it is very important for these communities that have a lot of people of African descent, large global Pan-African diasporas, to strengthen its economy so that its population can benefit. And the stronger economically they become, the more importance they will have on the geopolitical scene, on the international geopolitical scene, and they will demand more. They'll have more influence and demand more respect. So I'm glad to see this regional response here. So that was really very interesting when I saw. So the Caribbean is seeing that. Yes, some countries like Barbados, Guyana have 38%, but most of the countries was hovering about 10, 20%. But they do not want to communicate a sense of panic, which is good in my opinion, and trying to think regionally on how to solve that. So let's shift a bit towards Africa now, because Africa was hit massively when it comes to these tariffs. I mean, it's been quite something. So you can see on this table here, taken from BBC News Africa. So if you look at the countries that are the worst hit, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like the 10 countries that are the worst hit by Donald Trump tariffs. We have Lesotho hit by a 50% tariff. Lesotho, that's the country that Donald Trump, during his last address in Congress, was talking about Lesotho, a country that nobody has ever heard about. When he was talking about USAID, being suspended and eliminated from different countries, it was talking about Lesotho. Well, actually, Lesotho had responded to that statement, that slight disrespect by Donald Trump. But Lesotho actually produces jeans. So all of these big brand jeans that we wear in the United States and other countries, whether it's Levi's, the Wranglers, all these brands, well, a big chunk of that is actually produced in Lesotho. So it is producing for American brands. But nevertheless, Lesotho slapped with a tariff of 50%. Then you have Madagascar, 47%. You have Mauritius Island, 40%. You have Botswana, 37%. Botswana, obviously, which is known for its diamonds and so on. Angola, 32%. Libya, 31%. South Africa, 30%. Algeria, 30%. Tunisia, 28%. Ivory Coast, 21%. Now, I'm not going to get into the formula here that was used for these tariffs, but these countries are obviously being hit harshly. And so clearly they have to respond. Now, there's a regional response that is being prepared, all right? But there are still some countries that are wanting to go at the negotiation table individually. For example, you have the country of Zimbabwe, which was given a tariff of 18%. It's not on that list that I just showed, but I was looking at a statement from the president of Zimbabwe. His name is Emerson Mnangagwa. Obviously, Zimbabwe, that's the country that used to have Robert Mugabe as the president for many years. Robert Mugabe is seen by some as a Pan-Africanist, somebody who's great for African causes, Black people causes, but he's seen by others as a terrible dictator, terrible leader, and so on and so forth. Racist by some, but nevertheless, so that's his country, Zimbabwe. And so the current president, Emerson Mnangagwa, so his government issued a statement saying that he was talking about the 18% tariff that was slapped on his country. So they say this measure is intended to facilitate. No, I apologize. What he was saying is that they are wanting. No, that they were suspending all tariffs on imported American goods. So that was his response to the 18% tariffs. He literally immediately came and say, all right, so you know what? The U.S. is slapping us with an 18% tariff. So we will just suspend all tariffs from all goods imported from the US, which was seen by some as okay, really? That's a bit fast. But then they explained it by saying this measure is intended to facilitate the expansion of American imports within the Zimbabwean market while simultaneously promoting the growth of Zimbabwean export destined for the United States. That is what his office said on X, so Twitter. I mean, that in a sense, it's not also too surprising to see some president or some nations wanting to negotiate directly with the United States. We even saw Israel, for example, yesterday. Bibi Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu was in the United States, for example, to negotiate and discuss these tariffs directly with President Trump. So it's not necessarily surprising to see that some nations, African and otherwise, would want to negotiate individually. But I was really more interested with there is a regional response that is being prepared by the leaders of the AfCFTA. The AfCFTA, very rapidly, the AfCFTA stands for African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And as a matter of fact, let me just do this very quickly here, because I think this is important. It's almost 3 years ago. That was when I was really starting the whole AfriKili concept. I created the video. You can see the thumbnail. Oops, sorry, the thumbnail here, and you can find that video if you go on AfriKili towards the beginning of when we started posting videos. So you'll see that I did a whole video. It's only like 29 minutes, so 30 minutes, where I delved into the whole AfCFTA, right? So the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is essentially an agreement that was enacted all the way back in 1991 in Abuja, where leaders of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, met in Abuja and signed a treaty where they essentially said, we will create one big continental market across Africa. We will eliminate trade barriers within the African continent so that there's free movement of goods and trades of goods and people across Africa. That was enacted in 1991. It took 24 years for something to happen all the way to 2015 to finally put that Abuja Treaty into operation. So then it started being acted in 2015. And so African countries enacted like an Agenda 2060, what's not to have a full continental trade. This is significant. And as I talked about during that video that I made, I mean, because you look at Africa, a continent today of 54 countries with like 1.3 billion people, projected to be over 2 billion by 2050, the year 2050. This is a massive market, potentially. But there's ridiculous barriers that existed because of, the borders that were an inheritance of colonization. Those borders actually over time had created incentives where it was better to trade outside of Africa than within Africa. As a result, you have things like intra-trade, trade within the African continent. That was only at about 15%, the lowest of any other continent. Because you look at continents like Europe, which is upwards of almost 70% of intra-trade within European nations, within the EU. You look at North America, Canada, US, Mexico, somewhere about 51% of the trade volumes are intra-trade volumes. You have Asia in the 40s, the 40%. So on that show, I was talking about that, how intra-trade represent a massive opportunity for Africa, but you need that common market. So go. I really invite you to go and look at that show. And I talked about some of the African billionaires, Aliko Dangote, Strive Masiyiwa, Mo Ibrahims, that actually created their fortune by adopting a Pan-African mindset of doing business across their own national borders, but going across the continent. And they made their fortune in Africa. not outside of Africa, in Africa. They became billionaires by doing trade within Africa. So the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, represent a massive opportunity to strengthen the African continent. So, all right, be that as it may, this is what I wanted to talk about. So, with regards to the latest, Trump tariffs, well, the AfCFTA, at least its leadership, decided to issue some statements here. So I'm going to read the statement here by the AfCFTA leadership. By Wamkele Mene. Wamkele Mene, who is the Secretary General of the AfCFTA, because an organization was actually created, I'd say 2015, started becoming a real thing. So its current Secretary General, all right, so its leader, if you will, Wamkele Mene, he issued a few statements with regards to the tariffs that were imposed by Donald Trump. Here's what he said, for example. He said, the President of the United States has given us a wake-up call. And the wake-up call is that we must accelerate our own economic self-sufficiency. The ministers of trade will meet on the 14th of April to deliberate on this matter and exactly how our continent should respond. I was very encouraged to see this. So, seeing that they've decided, so on April 14th, so which is, I believe, next week, right? Because today is the 8th. So the 14th, we're talking about next Monday. So the ministers of trade of different African countries have decided to come together and think about an African response as a bloc. That is fantastic, because this is the sort of, I think, action that needs to be taken to fill those gaps that I was talking about, the disengagement of the American First policy, the gaps that are being created have to be filled, but Africa can do it effectively, and the Global PAC, generally speaking, can do it effectively by adopting a regional response. If a few minutes ago, I talked about how the Caribbean, through the CARICOM organization, is looking at different ways to respond as a Caribbean bloc. And so when it comes to Africa, I'm glad to see that. So Donald Trump, by his action, is now incentivizing these countries to come together under the umbrella of this AfCFTA. A lot of work obviously still needs to be done, right? And right now it's only statements. Will something really come out of it? We will see. Nevertheless, I'm seeing that there are certain things in motion now where the wake-up call that he's talking about, which, by the way, I'm glad he's mentioning it's a wake-up call, because if you recall, that is what I was saying. When I started talking about the American First policy, I was like, it's a wake-up call. African countries need to wake up. Countries in the Global PAC, generally speaking, need to wake up. Black communities need to wake up. And so glad to see that. And so he continued by saying that, quote, we will continue to pursue that trade and investment partnership that is based on mutual respect and mutual benefits. We will pursue what is in Africa's best interest, not last interest, but best interest, as we seek a path forward, he declared. So this was, as I said, very encouraging for me to see. Because as I always maintain, look, man, we live in a world where for too long, unfortunately, the Global PAC was subjected to rules that were put in place to essentially prevent the emergence of the Global PAC. But a large part of that, beyond those systems that are being put in place, were the African leaders, the Black leaders themselves, that also, a lot of time, were part of the problem, not part of the solution. So it is refreshing for me to see that you now have Black leaders across the world that are finally waking up and finally understanding that, you know what? If we want to make a real dent in this thing, we really want to influence this in a way that will be beneficial to Africa and to the Global PAC, we need to do it in a unified manner. And so when I see the AfCFTA leadership convening a meeting of all the African trade ministers to come up with a regional and a continental strategy, that is very, very encouraging to me. It is very encouraging to me because ultimately, when I adopt this stance, it is not an anti-American stance at all. I'm obviously in the United States. I'm fully fledged in this country. I served in the military in the U.S. I am a business owner in the United States. My kids were in the U.S. So I clearly love the United States. But I also believe that it has been unhealthy to have such a big hegemonistic power that has imposed unfair rules when it comes to actually global geopolitics, trade and otherwise. Although Donald Trump is clamoring and crying that other countries are treating us unfairly, no. If you look at it from the Global PAC perspective, it's been the other way around. So I believe that we need to get to a point where some of the nations that have been lagging behind strengthen themselves. And when I look at the Global PAC, Caribbean, I look at Africa, all the resources are there, human resources, natural resources, you name it, for the continents to strengthen themselves so that when we have stronger nations, I believe that we can really now get to a point where we can get to real fair negotiations. Because as long as we have nations that are so much more powerful than the others, militarily speaking, economically speaking, they'll continue imposing their way. Look at what Trump is doing today, like really destabilizing the global economy. But he's able to do it because of the power of his nation. He's not the one who created the U.S. strength. I mean, it's clearly not Donald Trump, but he's just there benefiting from what has been happening for the longest. And so as the president, he has the bully pulpit. What he says will project. He is the president of the most powerful nation. But he can do all this because of the strength of this nation. If his nation did not have the strength, first of all, people would not care about the politics coming out of this country, but that's not the reality. So to counter that, we need to get to a point where Africa is as strong as it gets so that the Global PAC is able to raise up. And that means, in terms of the mission of our platform, it would mean that we have strong coalition and bridges with Black people across the world, because a strong Africa, again, is to the benefit of the entire Global PAC. A strong Caribbean is to the benefit of the entire Global PAC. Very strong African American communities is for the benefit of the Global PAC. But a strong Africa would provide such a great, I would say, backing for that to happen. So yeah, so this is a great response in my sense, to see that, like, Donald Trump seems to be a necessary evil in a way with regards to the gaps that are created in those other nations, because the suffering that is created is a wake-up call. And I really hope there's no turning back going forward, that these nations will once and for all understand that they have what it takes to become self-sufficient. And that intra-trade piece is key. Intra-trade within the CARICOM, intra-trade within the African continent is key. And then obviously have a better trade balance when it comes to the United States and the developed nation. All right, so I will end up there for today. We've been going on for 53 minutes. I think this is the longest live we've done. The goal initially when I started was 30 minutes, but I think we've been hovering around 45 minutes. But this has been 50 minutes, so this has been long. All right, so as has become the tradition, I will end with a quote today. I realize that we have not quoted women too often, which is unfortunate. So I decided to quote a prominent lady in the Global PAC, Oprah Winfrey, who was also tied as number 8. If you remember when I started reading off the list of the richest Black people on the Forbes billionaires list, and she was tied at number 8. So I will end with a quote from Oprah Winfrey, and her quote says, The future of life as we know it is being determined by everything we are doing and not doing now. Emphasis now. I wholeheartedly agree with Oprah Winfrey. She's saying the future of life as we know it is being determined by everything we're doing now and or not doing. To me, I would say not only the future of life as we know it, but also the possibility of creating a new life, of innovating and transforming a future life so that life is different from the life as we know it. But all that opportunity is being determined by the actions, everything we're doing or not doing. So this is actually a call to action in my sense. Global PAC Nation, as I like to say, we have everything we need to transform the lives, transform the narratives when it comes to the Global PAC, the global Pan-African community and Black communities across the world. We have everything it takes. System that we've put in place for centuries, we have an understanding of those. So today, there's still a long road ahead, but we have everything it takes. So the future that we want to create will be determined by the actions we're taking or not taking right now. And so this platform, AfriKili and Global PAC, we're definitely on that trajectory. I will not relinquish. I will never abandon this mission. We'll continue creating bridges and strong coalition within the Global PAC so that we can change the narrative, so that we can elevate the condition of Black people and the Global PAC, generally speaking, and eventually get to a world that is more equal across the world. Then we will truly get to a world where the color of our skin does not matter, a world where being a member of the Global PAC just makes you a human like any other human. We'll get to that place. But yeah, so that was a quote from Oprah Winfrey. So I will end up here for today. AfriKili Nation Global PAC. As I like to say, remember, we are very strong people. We are a capable people. We are a beautiful people. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And more than anything, we are the Global PAC. So until next time, peace be with you. Asante sana, which means thank you very much in Swahili. And remember, we are the Global PAC. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry. Remember, please, to like the show. Click, like the show, share, hit the subscribe button, which only takes a second, so that you can help this platform grow and you can become part of this growing community. Thanks again. And once again, we are the Global PAC. See you next time.